Reminds me of this one time when I was living on the homestead as a child, being raised without running water, and my parents were actually wolves, and I had to fight grizzly bears most of my life.
For a while, Atz Lee Kilcher was a main character of Alaska, the last frontier, embodying the very essence of grit, danger, and resilience in life in one of America's last untamed wildernesses. Fans watched him scale cliffs, stalk game, and brave brutal winters, standing seemingly unshakable despite nature's harshest tests. Away from the cameras, his life was different in many ways as he faced a devastating fall, a lawsuit, and a scandal that reached the Alaskan courts. This would eventually collide and shatter the carefully built image of the fearless outdoorsman. Now, with the end of the series that made his name, Atz Lee Kilcher finds himself without the very show that once defined him. Join us as we follow his path to figure out why his career started to crumble, and, most importantly, if this crisis will be the storm that finally sinks his career into total obscurity. At the height of his fame, Atz Lee Kilcher seemed untouchable. As part of the Kilcher family, descendants of Swiss immigrants who carved out a life on the Alaskan frontier, he quickly became a fan favorite on the Discovery Channel. Viewers admired his daring spirit, whether he was scaling sheer rock faces, hunting for food in the wild, or constructing cabins in remote corners of the wilderness. Yet away from the screen, his life was marked by personal hardship, dangerous accidents, and choices that would ultimately drag his name into headlines for all the wrong reasons. Still, his story isn't complete without chronicling his rise to the top, because one can't know how far he's fallen without knowing how high he reached. The rise of a frontier star and a legacy written in the wilderness. Atz Lee was not a man who came out of obscurity or some unknown background. He was born into the Kilcher family, a clan already a part of Alaskan history. The Kilcher's story begins with Swiss immigrants Yule and Ruth Kilcher, who left the comforts of Europe in the 1940s to carve out a life of independence on the Alaskan frontier. They established a homestead on the rugged outskirts of Homer, Alaska, a place where icy winds bit hard, winters lasted forever, comfort was a rare luxury, and survival was never guaranteed. This pioneer spirit became the family's lifeblood, and generations of Kilchers grew up learning to fish, hunt, build, and adapt to the raw rhythms of nature. Atz Lee, who was born in 1977, also inherited this legacy alongside his siblings, including his brother Shane and sister Jewel, the latter who would go on to become a world-famous singer-songwriter. Unlike Jewel's path to stardom, Atz Lee's fame was tied not to music, but to the physical demands of frontier life. From an early age, he quickly stood out for his restless and adventurous nature with a streak of adventure to match. While many Kilchers embraced the rhythm of homestead living, Atz Lee constantly tested his limits by venturing further into the wilderness, climbing higher, and pushing himself into situations that carried both risk and reward. This energy would one day make him central to a television audience hungry for authenticity and danger. The chance came when the Discovery Channel launched Alaska, the last frontier. In 2011, the network was looking for more than just another reality show. Viewers had already been introduced to Alaskan survival through series like Deadliest Catch, but The Last Frontier offered something much different. It was the chance to witness a family living almost completely off the grid, relying simply on centuries-old practices to endure modern winters. The Kilchers were the perfect candidates. Within the big cast of family members, Atz Lee quickly emerged as a standout. His rugged good looks, adventurous nature, and willingness to tackle the most dangerous tasks gave him a screen presence that naturally drew attention. The show captured him climbing precarious ridges, stalking moose in thick snow, or dragging supplies across frozen terrain. Where others might hesitate, Atz Lee leaned into the danger. For viewers, he represented the very essence of Alaskan resilience. Fans weren't just watching a man survive. They were watching someone who seemed to embrace risk as a way of life, and perhaps embodied the kind of adrenaline rush they wanted to feel. This quality made Atz Lee the beating heart of the series, particularly for those drawn to the drama and adrenaline of wilderness living. His appeal wasn't limited to his physical feats. The show framed him as a man constantly seeking more, a restless soul who couldn't stay still, even within the demanding rhythms of the homestead. He was often portrayed as striving to carve his own path, whether by building remote cabins, testing new methods of survival, or embarking on solo hunts that pushed him deep into Alaska's unforgiving terrain. In many ways, he was the embodiment of the frontier man, a figure both mythic and modern. Reality television thrives on personalities that carry archetypal weight, and Atz Lee's character did just that. He was the risk-taker, the adventurer, the one willing to gamble comfort for glory. In contrast to family members like his father, Atz Kilcher Sr., who often represented wisdom and stability, he was cast as the daredevil, the man who kept viewers perched on the edge of suspense. This persona gave him a unique fan following. Many saw in him the spirit of Alaska itself, untamed, unpredictable, and uncompromising. Others admired the sheer physicality of his survival, the way he made hauling logs, repairing cabins, or hunting bears look not just necessary, but noble. Social media buzzed with commentary about his feats, and he became a favorite among younger viewers who craved action over tradition. Behind the camera, the construction of his image was as important as what viewers saw on screen. Reality television, after all, thrives on selective storytelling. Producers leaned heavily into his adventurous persona, often highlighting moments where he pushed limits or took risks. Episodes would center on his attempts to secure food in dangerous conditions, or his efforts to establish self-sufficiency far from the core homestead, and he also contributed to the myth-making. On social media, he frequently posted updates about his projects, shared photos of breathtaking Alaskan landscapes, and offered glimpses into the relentless labor required to live off the land. His posts often carried a poetic edge, reflecting on the beauty and brutality of wilderness living. This blend of rugged imagery and introspective commentary deepened his connection with fans, who saw not just a television character, but a man fully immersed in his environment. Even within his own family, Atz Lee was often portrayed as different. While his siblings largely settled into established routines of homestead life, he often struck out on his own. He was known for building cabins in remote, isolated areas, places that could only be reached by hiking miles through rugged terrain. These efforts reinforced his image as a man unwilling to rely on anyone else, someone determined to carve his own piece of Alaska, even if it meant enduring solitude and hardship. This independent streak clicked with viewers. In a culture increasingly dominated by convenience and technology, his commitment to self-reliance felt almost radical. He seemed to embody the lost virtues of toughness, perseverance, and grit. These were qualities many admired, but few could hardly live by. Though Alaska, the last frontier, celebrated the collective spirit of the Kilcher family, Atz Lee's personal storylines often added emotional depth. His marriage to Jane Kilcher, for instance, gave the show a more intimate angle. Jane, who grew up in Homer but had worked as a commercial fisherman, brought her own toughness to the series, and together the couple represented both the hardships and bonds that frontier life demanded. Their relationship became a recurring theme, offering viewers moments of vulnerability amid the physical struggles of survival. Fans rooted for the couple as they raised their children in an environment that, while harsh, promised a childhood free from many of modern society's distractions. In these moments, he was not just a daredevil, but a husband and father, a man balancing risk with responsibility. By the mid-2010s, Alaska, The Last Frontier had become one of the Discovery Channel's most popular reality series, drawing millions of viewers and multiple seasons of renewal, and he was at the center of this success. Magazine profiles, online articles, and fan discussions often singled him out as the show's most interesting character. At his peak, he symbolized not only survival, but also aspiration. He was the man living the dream others fantasized about, a life free from cubicles, traffic, and bills, where survival depended on skill and determination rather than paychecks and deadlines. The allure of his lifestyle, broadcast weekly into living rooms around the world, fueled fantasies of self-sufficiency and escape. Yet even during this period of triumph, there were hints of trouble brewing. The same independence that made Atz Lee a standout also created friction within the family, within production, and himself. Reality television thrives on tension, and in many ways, his restless spirit became both his greatest asset and his most dangerous liability. Still, none of that was visible to the audience enthralled by his feats. To fans, he remained the man who could scale mountains, wrestle with storms, and laugh in the face of adversity. His image was larger than life, a mythic figure forged in ice and stone. This steadfast image is why his eventual fall would be so shocking. For when a man who seemed unbreakable stumbles, it creates a landslide effect. The fall that changed everything. Every great rise carries with it the shadow of a fall. And for Atz Lee Kilcher, the fall did not happen in a courtroom or a scandal, but on the jagged edge of an Alaskan mountainside in the summer of 2015. It was a moment that shifted his life from myth to mortality, transforming the fearless adventurer into just a normal man fighting simply to survive. It was supposed to be just another outing, one more adventure in a lifetime full of them. He had spent years navigating Alaska's unforgiving terrain, often pushing himself into situations that looked impossible to others. But this time, the danger turned real. While hiking near the Otter Cove Resort, he slipped and plummeted roughly 40 feet down a cliff. The injuries were devastating, leaving him with a broken arm, a broken ankle, a broken hip, and a crushed rib cage. Most men would not have survived such a fall, and for a time, it wasn't clear that he would be the exception. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked to stabilize him. His family, used to seeing him as indestructible, suddenly faced the terrifying possibility of losing him. Fans, too, were stunned as news of the accident spread quickly online. For many, it was the first time they realized just how dangerous Atz Lee's adventures could be. On the show, risk had always been part of the thrill, but here was proof that it wasn't just television suspense. It was life or death veiled in entertainment. And now that veil had been pierced. With the severity of his injuries, the road to recovery was a long and grueling process. Months of surgery, physical therapy, and pain management were but a few things he had to go through just to get back some semblance of normalcy. He documented parts of the journey on social media, offering fans glimpses into his struggle. The man who once bounded across the Alaskan wilderness now found himself confined to hospital rooms and rehabilitation centers, learning how to walk again. The physical toll was immense, but so was the psychological one. Atz Lee had built his identity on daring, movement, and strength. Now, stripped of those abilities, he faced questions about who he was without them. He was never sure he would be able to return to the life that defined him, or if he had fallen permanently, a change that would redefine his place in the wilderness and within the show. As the months dragged on, another storm gathered. Atz Lee filed a lawsuit against the Otter Cove Resort, arguing that the property's lack of safety precautions had contributed to his accident. The case drew headlines across Alaska and beyond. Here was the man who had embodied self-reliance and toughness now turning to the courts, demanding accountability. The lawsuit sparked debate. Supporters saw it as a fair attempt to secure justice after a devastating injury. Critics, however, accused him of hypocrisy. Hadn't he always celebrated risk as part of frontier life? Hadn't he chosen to climb cliffs and live dangerously? For some, the lawsuit undermined the very image of rugged independence that had made him famous. The accident and lawsuit exposed cracks in Atz Lee's carefully crafted image. He was no longer the untouchable adventurer, but a man vulnerable to both physical danger and public criticism. And as he struggled with recovery, the pressures of fame and family worsened the weight. Of course, reality television, with its relentless demand for drama, is the last place for respite. It's an unforgiving environment. Producers wanted Atz Lee back on screen, and fans longed for his return. But the man behind the persona was not fully healed. The tension between image and reality grew sharper with each passing season. This was a man whose life was already tilting under the pressures of the accident and lawsuit. Yet for him, there was no let-up, as soon another blow would be struck. The unexpected and devastating lawsuit. In 2014, before his accident, he and another man had been accused of illegally using a helicopter to hunt a black bear. In Alaska, where hunting laws are strict and deeply tied to both culture and conservation, such allegations carried serious weight. The case lingered, and in 2015, charges were officially filed. Atz Lee suddenly found himself not just recovering from a near-fatal fall, but also facing the possibility of prison. The fearless adventurer, once celebrated for his rugged independence, now stood accused of breaking the very laws that safeguarded the wilderness he was a part of. Eventually, the case came to a head. He avoided jail time, and while the charges were eventually dropped in exchange for a fine, it had become a mark in his history. On paper, the event may have seemed trivial, but in terms of reputation, the damage was far heavier. Headlines sprang up with the words "sentenced" and "illegal hunting," framing him not as the hero of Alaska, but as someone who had crossed the line. For fans, the scandal was disorienting. The same man they had admired for living honorably off the land was now painted as someone willing to exploit it. For the Discovery Channel, the controversy was toxic. Reality television thrives on drama, but articles parading criminal sentences cast a different kind of shadow. Soon after, Alaska, the last frontier, quietly faded over the years, and its loyal audience was left with the memory of their most dynamic figure being entangled in heavy drama. The impact wasn't limited to Atz Lee's public image. His marriage to Jane, already strained by the pressures of living both on a homestead and under a television spotlight, began to fall apart even more. Jane often spoke openly about her discomfort with fame, noting that the intrusion of cameras made their lives harder rather than easier. The accident, the lawsuit, and the hunting scandal piled additional strain onto a partnership already tested by Alaska's harsh realities. Within the family, too, tension grew. The Kilchers had always prided themselves on resilience and self-reliance, and for some, Atz Lee's choices, like suing a resort and breaking hunting laws, seemed to clash with that tradition. Whether spoken or unspoken, the judgment weighed heavily. For the audience that had followed his rise, the fall was difficult to process. Online forums were filled with debate, as some took him as a victim of circumstance changed by fame, while others defended him fiercely, arguing that one mistake should not erase years of authenticity. Others felt betrayed, insisting that the man they had admired had revealed himself to be something far less noble. The truth, as always, was more complicated. Atz Lee was neither a pure hero nor an outright villain, but a normal man caught in the unforgiving glare of reality television and public scrutiny. Still, for fans who had invested in the myth, the fall was real and painful. When Discovery finally pulled the plug on Alaska, the last frontier, it marked more than just the end of a show. For many, It symbolized the end of Atz Lee's era. The frontier star, who had once embodied resilience, risk, and independence, was now absent from screens, his name linked more to scandal than survival. He returned to a quieter life, far from the cameras, but the shadow of his public downfall lingered. The man who had once stood at the peak of frontier celebrity was now a cautionary tale about the costs of fame, the dangers of myth-making, and the brutal reality of living on the edge. In the end, his story was not just about survival in Alaska. It was about survival under the weight of expectation. His rise had made him larger than life, and his fall proved he was human after all, who was also prey to the dangers of the wild. He was tougher than most, but ultimately immortal. What do you think of his life? Was he simply drunk on fame? Or had he been a victim of circumstances? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. To enjoy more exciting videos, click play on the video on your screen. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you get notified when a new video is released.